Well, good evening and welcome. I'm Janice Portentosa, the WSHU station manager, and we are so happy to have all of you here at the WSHU Public Radio Broadcast Center on the campus of Sacred Heart University. I think we all want to hear from Akhil Reed Amar, who we are very honored to have here for this Join the Conversation event. But I would like to first thank and recognize the humanists and free thinkers of Fairfield County who really helped to make this event possible. Amy Ewing would like to say a couple of words.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to add a welcome from the Humanist group as well, and a thank you to WSHU for partnering with us on this event, bringing together the speaker, the moderator, and the publicity. So thank you all for coming. Thanks to WSHU and everybody who helped make this possible.
We're going to get right to it. So without further ado, I will introduce tonight's moderator, Nadine Strossen. Now, I wanted to say a few words about her amazing background. She made me promise not to. So I will only say that Nadine is a great friend of WSHU, and we are so grateful to have her and her enormous expertise here tonight. So Nadine, thank you.
Thank you so much, Janice. And I was going to briefly introduce myself. I've been a constitutional law professor. I was the national president of the American Civil Liberties Union for many years. And now I am a senior fellow with FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. I think for this great event with my wonderful friend and one of my heroes as a scholar and as a teacher, Akhil Amar, it is so fitting that we are speaking in a series called Join the Conversation, because Akhil writes so beautifully about the concept of the constitutional conversation. And his book is very much in the spirit of promoting that conversation among all of us. So I get to introduce Akhil. I'm going to be brutally short because his biography is so long. To me, one of the most impressive things about Akhil is that he has won, in effect, the Triple Crown at Yale, earning the highest honors, not only for scholarship, not only also for teaching, but third, for being of the greatest service to the university community. Not only is he an unbelievably important person at this important university, but his influence goes so far beyond. To cite just one example, the United States Supreme Court, which has cited him almost 50 times in opinions by justices all across the ideological spectrum. He has been cited more often than any single person under the age of 70. Those who are over 70 had a little bit more time to rack up. You'll get there. And you know, Akhil also speaks everywhere. That's how we met each other, actually. I think the first time we shared a platform together decades ago was at Harvard Law School. And one of the most recent times was at the Ridgefield Library. I mean, so, you know, very diverse audiences and settings. He writes prolifically, not only scholarly books, but also for general audiences. He has a regular column. He has a podcast called America's Constitution. And Akhil also amazingly has time for family, friends. He's got an amazing network of friends and colleagues. But I recently just learned for the very first time that he also has a large four-footed family, which for animal lovers was really added even more to your luster. Okay, I'm just going to say one more thing before I turn it over to Akhil. This book is a very weighty book, literally, as well as figuratively. And that's a great compliment for me, Akhil. I travel constantly, and I always try to travel carry-on. And yet this book, which weighs, I wrote it down, 2.5 pounds. I had to choose between the book and another pair of shoes, and I chose the book. Now, the book is part of a trilogy, and I'd love to invite you to give us the overall arc of the trilogy and situate the book in it. But speaking especially from my activist perspective, Akhil, as part of your answer to that question, I want you to tell us not only the what of the book, but the why, because I found it such a wonderful combination of brilliant scholarship, including original historical research, and it is also intended to inspire activism, to stimulate us not only to passively learn more about our past, but to engage actively in the present and future.
So, Nadine, it's such an honor to be back with you. Thank you to our hosts. You talked about our history. I think that's the key. We, the American people, have a history, and truthfully, it's maybe almost the only thing that we do have in common. We have different races and national origins. Our great-grandparents came from all the other continents of the planet. We're a people of many faiths, and that includes people of no faith at all. And that's important to remember today, especially given our sponsorship, that there's freedom to believe or not believe. We don't really have politics in common. We're deeply divided geographically. We're vast, even first language. It's not English for all of us. So what holds us together? What do we have? I believe we have the Constitution as our supreme law and the story behind that Constitution, including the story behind other closely associated constitutive documents that constitute us, that make us Americans, like the Declaration of Independence, like the Gettysburg Address, like the I Have a Dream speech. Okay, so if that's what we have in common together, that is our past, I think we need materials to help remind us of that past. And at my most grandiose moments, I think, maybe my purpose in life is to try to chronicle that past, to tell the story not of me, but of us. So I'm trying to write 3 volumes about 250 plus years of American history. Volume 1, and they're chronological. Volume 1 tells the story of the first 4 years. That's the Lincolnian phrase, of course, 1760 to 1840. And Volume 1 is entitled The Words That Made Us. It's a pun, the words that made the U.S., the United States, but also the words that made we, the people. We come together by talking to each other. Because in 1760, we're not actually a we. We're New Yorkers and South Carolinians and Virginians, and we're all talking to London, but we're not even talking to each other. The newspapers aren't running stories from other colonies, and we talk ourselves into nationhood, into a peoplehood through conversation. You're right. And so the subtitle of Volume 1, which is How We Come Together, is America's Constitutional Conversation, 1760 to 1840. And at the beginning, we're not a we at all. At the end, we've won our independence collectively. We've embraced a Declaration of Independence. We've had a round of state constitutions. We've had a continental regime 1.0, the Articles of Confederation. We've revised that with a stronger and better and indivisible constitution. We've added important amendments affirming rights. So we've become a we by 1840. We've launched a new system. We've had presidents. We've had peaceful transitions of power from one party to another. But at 1840, here are the challenges. The founding generation is dying off, has died off. Will the next generation be able to carry the project forward? Oh, and we're deeply divided, especially about the slavery issue. The North has gotten rid of slavery in many places, including Connecticut, and the South has not. that's where the curtain lifts. And in the second volume, the key theme of volume 1 was becoming a we, the words that made us. This second volume, the subtitle is Remaking America's Constitution. So we need to make it anew, make amends. America's Constitution, Remaking America's Constitution, 1840 to 1920. The title is, in 2 words, it's my thesis. Also, it's the big theme of these next 80 years, born equal, birth equality. We're going to commit ourselves to an increasingly broad and deep idea that we're all created equal. We're all born equal, black and white, male and female, Jew and Gentile, in wedlock or out of wedlock. That's the theme of 4, count them, 4 amendments in this period whose central idea is birth equality. They're Lincolnian amendments. Abe is at the center of the book. There are others as well: Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Susan B. Anthony. But a 13th Amendment is going to affirm that we're born equally free. No one's born a slave. No one's born a master. 14th Amendment is going to say we're born equal citizens, whether we're born black or white, male or female, with fundamental birthrights of citizenship. A 15th Amendment is going to say whether you're born black or white, you should be entitled not just to civil rights and citizenship rights, but equal voting rights. And by the end of my period, 1920, a 19th Amendment will affirm that whether you're born male or female, you too are entitled to equal political rights. So these are 4 Lincolnian amendments in this period between 1840 and 1920, affirming the birth equality idea. Now, if I'm really lucky and I live long enough, volume 3 will take the story from 1920 to the present, and its tentative title is Earth's Best Hope, America's Constitution 1920 to the present. And if I'm able to complete that volume, we'll have 3 volumes that high school kids could read, that Supreme Court justices could read, folks in the ACLU could read, that tells the story of us.
Wonderful. Well, consistent with this notion of carrying on, not only telling us about the constitutional conversation, but your goal really is to engage all of us in that conversation. Even though the book is, just reflecting stellar and painstaking scholarship, it is also extremely novelistic. It's got characters, it's got stories, and that's indicated by, I think, the most unique dedication. I can't say most unique, that's redundant. A unique dedication. This book is dedicated to Elizabeth, Frederick, Harriet, and, of course, Abe. And then you go on, may their memories continue to be a blessing for Americans of every sort, which is a traditional Jewish.
Exactly so. You picked up on that. Yes, I happen not to be Jewish, but I wanted my Jewish friends to pick up on that. The last book was dedicated to Lin-Manuel Miranda, Vanessa Nadal, his spouse, Ron Chernow, who wrote the book, the biography, the great biography of Hamilton, on which Lin based the musical, Kaiser Khan, a Gold Star father who lost a son in the service of our country, and to Neil Kumar Katyal, who introduced me to them all. Now, I didn't tell the backstory of that dedication, but the backstory to that dedication is about American religious diversity. I happen to be an adult convert Christian. Neil happens to be Hindu. Kaiser Khan happens to be Muslim. Ron Chernow, Jewish. Lynn and Vanessa, I'm guessing, are born Catholic, but I've never asked them today exactly, where they are in their spiritual journey. But the point is, we're all Americans. And so I'm glad you picked up on that, Nadine. Yes.
But I was also picking up on the first name. Now, you had referred to Abe earlier, but why not? So I'd like to know why you, and you refer to them throughout the book, and they really do feel like people that you know. in a way that, and without diminishing the awe with which you regard them. And I think, why don't we start with Abe, because you describe him. I feel a little bit irreverent calling him that, but you describe him in the most superlative terms, which I would love to have you share your view of him, despite seeing his flaws.
His friends called him Abe, and Americans called him Abe, and he was proverbially honest Abe. And no one ever referred to his debate partner, Stephen Douglas, as honest Stephen, because he wasn't. And Roger Taney, as Chief Justice, wasn't honest. Okay. Actually, I'm very critical of Thomas Jefferson in the last book because he lied. So
What about George Washington? Is it true he never told a lie?
No, but I think, and I even in that last book said, the thing that often inclines them to lie is slavery.
Mhm.
They know it's wrong and they're making excuses for it and they're hiding it. And I think that's interesting, that if you have a lie at the center of your life, it's cancerous in certain ways. Now, Washington gets better on slavery as his life moves forward. Jefferson, worse. And I try to trace those life arcs. But in the arc of American history, we're moving from an era where no one would call him Thomas or George, but they are actually referring to Lincoln as Abe. So that's one thing. So I'm telling you about a different era. It's a more informal era. It's a more Jacksonian era of informality, and this is all about birth equality. And if I use last names, that's patriarchal. That's your father's last name. So that's a little complicated. And I'm also talking about a world in which women are now increasingly prominent. Their last names change. That doesn't seem fair when Elizabeth, her last name changes from Katie to Stanton or something. So but her identity doesn't change. Men don't change their last names, but women do change their last name. And Harriet is married to a very prominent person. He's got the same last name, so this is going to be a little confusing if I refer to them both as Stanton, because do I mean, Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Henry Brewster Stanton? And as I said, it's somewhat patriarchal to pick last names, which are father's names. Slaves are referred to often by their first name, so why not masters and non-slaves? And Nadine, a whole bunch of people hate my choice of the first name, but for me, it was because I actually thought I was coming to know them. I'm reading their diaries. I'm reading about the moment when Harriet loses an infant. And since I'm peering into her life and I'm feeling as if she's become a friend, and that I want to introduce my friends to my readers, I want them to feel a sense of connection. These are human beings. So it was a little bit edgy.
But I really loved it. As I say, I love reading novels, and this was amazingly novelistic. In addition to Abe, I also want to make sure to hear you expound a little bit about Harriet, because she has a Connecticut connection. Of course, she was born in Litchfield, right in this county, educated at the Hartford Female Seminary, and spent the last 23 years of her life in Hartford. She was astoundingly impactful. I think I had known something about that, but I learned so much more from your wonderful book. You talk about her as the first female superstar whose book really should be taught in history, not just as a work of literature.
So I'll let you in on a secret. Blurbing can be a little bit corrupt. I blurb your book and you blurb mine, and I don't have to read the book. I just have to blurb it. Nadine is not that way at all. Oh, she's read the book with great care, and I'm grateful. And she's telling you stuff that only someone who's read the book with great care. She said generous things on the back of this book. She blurbed it, but she describes actually the book and in a way that only someone who actually read it could describe it. So yes, Harriet is, to me, Harriet Beecher Stowe, an astonishing person because she's the first woman that everyone in America is talking about simultaneously. Abigail Adams is important, but she's off stage. She's backstage. The founding period, that earlier book was novelistic. I had 6 characters. They're all white men. And don't blame me. They are the 6 dominant political figures of the founding era. If we played Family Feud, and I played this game with dozens of audiences, I say, name a prominent founder. They always name these as the top 6. Survey says your first 4 presidents, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and your 2 geniuses, Hamilton and Franklin, but they're all male. They're all white. So this is a book all about birth equality, black and white, male and female. You have to have a different cast of characters. You have to have Abe Lincoln at the center. But now and I'm not making it up. I'm not plucking some woman from obscurity and trying to make a big deal of her when no one in her lifetime knew who she was. Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose father is Yale educated, yes, so there is a Connecticut angle, writes a book that sells more copies than any book by an American of the century, way more than Huck Finn or Tom Sawyer or Moby Dick, which doesn't sell very much, or Scarlet Letter. Everyone is millions, literally millions of copies in America and worldwide. It becomes a play that is the most, in different incarnations, the most watched play for half a century. And she's writing about America's biggest and hardest political issue, slavery. She changes how people think about slavery. She writes as a woman, as a mother, about women and mothers, about slave women who are being raped as women and treated as wet nurses as women, and sexual playthings as women, and are having babies ripped from their arms as mothers. It's not just about Uncle Tom. It's about Aunt Chloe and Eliza and Cassie and a whole bunch of other women. And just so you understand this era, I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, and I talk about Jane. Okay, I feel about, in if you've seen like Jane Austen Club or whatever, they talk about Jane. Okay, now this is the 250th anniversary of her birth, but she writes under, in effect, a female pseudonym. She writes as a lady. And George Sand and George Eliot have male pseudonyms, and Louisa May Alcott publishes under an androgynous pseudonym, and all the Bronte sisters publish as men, pseudonyms: Currier Bell, Acton Bell, Ellis Bell. They don't publish as Elizabeth Bronte or, Charlotte Bronte. So Harriet, she's publishing under her name as a woman, as a mother. She's writing about women and mothers. She's lost a baby. She knows how that feels. And she's writing about slave women who are at risk of losing babies, having them ripped from her. So, and you can't think about slavery the same way after she has written. You're no longer just thinking it's an economic thing. It's about men who are field hands or something like that. Fully half of slaves are female, and when you add the children to that, most of them are not actually, adult males. So she just changes how people think about slavery. And when Lincoln meets her in the White House, he says, "You're the little woman who wrote the big book that made this great war." And since it's novelistic, these people are connected. She's from a very religious family of preachers. Her most famous brother is the most famous preacher man in America. He'd be the equivalent of Billy Graham in the 1950s. And his name is Henry Ward Beecher. And he invites this relatively obscure politician from the plains, Abraham Lincoln, to introduce himself to the Eastern establishment. We call that the Cooper Union Address, the Cooper Institute Address. That's when Abe actually wins over the Eastern elite and, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe clinches the deal so that he'll be the presidential nominee. That's actually Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother. It's a very interesting family.
Well, Akhil, you alluded to what I learned were called Tom shows, that were performed all over the country. And although so many millions of people read the book, even more people saw these shows. And one of my pet peeves is that most people don't know that Uncle Tom was not an Uncle Tom. It was those shows that caricatured this
Yes.
character and really inverted somebody who was a very heroic figure.
Huge courage. Uncle was a sign of respect, even of white people, because he had not just courage, but character and virtue. And he was not shrinking, absolutely. But since you and I very much believe in robust expression, robust, uninhibited, wide open expression in all sorts of forms, Uncle Tom's Cabin begins in newspapers.
Mhm.
And these are movement newspapers, and people actually are writing to Harriet Beecher Stowe as she's writing in serial form, giving her suggestions for the things. So it's kind of crowdsourced. It's an interesting interaction between author and reader, and it's performed as plays. So you and I very much think that we have to have broad protection of all sorts of expressions, since you mentioned fire, of theatrical performances, of newspapers, of novels. See, this is a fictional thing, but it's making a political point. You can't, and I think of our friend David Souter, who actually was very good on this, who understood that you can't just have a narrow idea of this kind of expression
Right.
or that one. Oh, you have to protect music,
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
and
Absolutely.
art. Exactly so. And so these, I talk about parades and petitions and flags and emblems. So yes, she writes newspaper pieces and novels, and plays are made of it, parodies, all sorts of things.
And anti-Tom books. So one of Abe's famous statements was, "My best friend is the person who gives me a book I have not yet read." So I'm very much hoping you haven't yet read this book that I'm going to give you. But if you have, give it to somebody else who hasn't. It is by a mutual friend, Henry Louis Gates
Oh
at
my
Harvard,
goodness.
and Hollis Robbins, a friend of mine as well, whom I more recently met. And it is the annotated Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is an absolute
I do not have
treasure.
this. And
It is a
Skip is
treasure.
heroic for me.
And
on the original books, yes, it had 6 color illustrations, and those color illustrations were really important because now you're not just reading about Tom, you're seeing a depiction of
Yeah.
him. And let's talk about one more person at least, Frederick.
Yeah.
Frederick
Yeah.
Douglass. And Frederick Douglass is the most photographed
Yeah.
American of the century. And it's important that you see that he's actually real. He's a black man. People said, oh, he's too smart to really be black. He's just a white person in blackface or something. Now he's showing you picture after picture after picture. And when you see photographs, very famous photographs of blacks who have been whipped and the scars on their back, and seeing is believing. So, photography and art and theater, the illustrations are actually really important in Uncle Tom's Cabin.
And in your book also has fantastic illustrations and beautiful maps. So it's a multidisciplinary book. Can you tell us a little bit about why you included, in addition to being multidisciplinary, I should say, because that's history and political philosophy and culture and literature, but it's also multimedia with the drawings and with the reproductions of various artistic works and the gorgeous maps.
And this book that I just received as a gift, and Skip is a real hero of mine, has actually color inserts. This is one of Tom and little Eva. It's a wonderful spiritual friendship that arises between a black man and a little white girl. Spoiler alert here. They both kind of die martyrs' deaths, and other people are inspired in their death to try to live better lives. But it's very touching, the story of Uncle Tom and little Eva. There are many subplots in the book, but I'm showing you this because this is beautifully rendered. These color. I have 8 pages of glossy color inserts. I use my color for maps because I'm trying to show you the Civil War is all about geography. It's about borders. It's about rivers. It's about sovereignty, and you can see all sorts of things in the maps. My publisher was very hesitant because the color adds to the printing costs, so I said, I'll give you anything you want. I'll even make it shorter, because, I'll try to economize in other ways if you can give me the color maps. So, yes, there's a lot of artwork in the book, photographs and sketches, but also maps.
So, Akhil, you described these wonderful characters as they are heroic, but they're also human beings. And so you show them with their flaws, although you do use a very superlative description of Abe. If I can paraphrase, it was something like, never has any country been,
no country has, in my view, ever produced anyone politically better than Abe and then picked that person as their supreme leader. So it's so easy to identify someone else's flaws, okay? Because we're all human. I say, fine, net, name me someone better, or please stop dumping on Lincoln. And since you mentioned, for example, my reference to a Jewish remembrance, may their memory be a blessing. I tell the story of Lincoln's death. Lincoln dies. He's shot, actually, on Good Friday, as it turns out. You can't die better than that. You're being martyred in a Christian nation. And he's not a conventional churchgoer. If he were, he wouldn't actually be at a comedy on Good Friday. And Thomas Jefferson's not a conventional churchgoer, and I'm aware that this event is being co-sponsored by all sorts of religious free thinkers, and 2 of our 4 Rushmore presidents are pretty free thinking, and even George Washington is not a conventional churchgoer, at least late in life. He's a vestryman, but okay. So Lincoln is shot on Friday at Ford's Theater at about April 14th at about 10 p.m. or so. The wound is mortal, but so the doctors can't save him, but they can just try to make him comfortable. They carry him across the street. He passes at about 7:20 next morning. Why am I telling you all these details? Because that's Saturday morning. Now, you're living in a world where you have a new technology. It's telegraphy, the telegraph. So news can actually, at the speed of light, go to everyone in the continent. And so who are the first people in America to hear of Abe's death as a group? It's Jews on Saturday at synagogue, okay? And they hear of Abe's death, and they spontaneously say Kaddish. Offer prayers to the throne of God for this non-Jew. That's not the tradition at all, and this includes in New York's oldest synagogue. And I just think it was just spontaneous, and that just shows you I'm not making up his greatness after the fact. People saw in his lifetime what a special soul he was. I actually have you, I tell you what his stepmother says. Now, proverbially, stepmothers, often don't sort of fall in love with their stepchildren. If you read, Grimm's fairy tales or something like that, and think about this guy. he's born into nothing, in the dirt, no family fortune, no family name, no family power base. His father is barely literate, and he's a bookish little guy who just has always he learns basically how to read because he loves newspapers and he reads them all the time. And his father says, this guy's lazy. He just wants to read instead of, working in the field like me. What's wrong with what I'm doing? I'm working in the field. So his father doesn't ever understand the kid. And his father's barely literate. His mother dies when he's 9 years old. He has no advantage in life at all, but his father remarries an amazing woman who, when she meets Abe, the father just goes off for months because he can't raise these kids on his own. So he has to find himself a wife. He finds a widow. He convinces her to come back with him. He's gone for months. Abe Lincoln at 9 years old is just alone with his sibling, his 11-year-old sister. She arrives. She sees this kid. He hasn't probably had a bath in 6 months. Her heart goes out to the kid, but she writes about him after he dies. I want you to read it in the book, what she says about from the beginning, how kind he is to other people, how honest he is. So most men, for example, and this isn't, this isn't the only thing, but most men, they cuss, they drink, they smoke, they chew tobacco, they cheat on women. He doesn't do any of those things. He's kind. I know you're going to laugh, but he's kind to animals. He is. He befriends. When you actually realize, I'm not making any of this, how decent a person he was. Now, you don't have to agree with me on this. I'm not that much of a fan of our president. I'm not. I voted against him 3 times, but Abe Lincoln, this country actually produced an Abe Lincoln. I'm not making that up. And I want you to see who he was. And I don't think any country has ever produced anyone as impressive as their supreme leader. How is it that America produced a Lincoln and then picked him?
Yeah. Well, just as you are very fair toward your really heroic, impressive characters, you also take a nuanced view toward the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and this major issue of slavery and the debate over are these founding documents that are enshrining liberty? Are they pro-liberty or are they pro-slavery? And you get into that debate, which really foreshadows debates we're having now about the 1619 Project and critical race theory and so forth, mostly through Douglas or Frederick, I'm so sorry, and Abe. So and you show their views, especially Frederick's, I think, evolves. But why don't you illuminate their views and then tell us what your own is?
Okay, you and I believe in debate, in discourse. You're heroic this way, and you're willing to talk to all sorts of people that you disagree with, but you think you have to engage them. And you've been on my podcast, and I've actually asked you questions about, where you draw the line. And you do draw a line. You're not going to debate certain people who aren't debating in good faith, and you think are, but you want to engage as many folks as you can in good faith and reason. That's not just what you believe; it's who you are and what you do all the time. Abe Lincoln becomes president as a result of a series, this is amazing. You know this, but you've forgotten it, of constitutional debates, okay? And these aren't food fights. The constitutional debates with another lawyer about the meaning of the Declaration of Independence, about how to think about the Dred Scott case, about the Constitution itself. This is astonishing. And farmers and their spouses and their kids come from far and wide, up and down Illinois, and to watch these 7 debates, and the Telegraph actually communicates stenographically to everyone in America. This is astonishing. This is how.
Remind us how long the debates went on, too.
Oh, 3 hours typically, an hour, and nobody from nowhere becomes president because I think he's the greatest constitutionalist of his generation. He's an originalist, I believe. He's going to take seriously what the Constitution actually says. Originalism isn't the unique province of conservatives. It's anyone who takes seriously the Constitution and its history. He hates slavery, but he will enforce provisions of the Constitution that he doesn't like the Fugitive Slave Clause, but he says it's in the Constitution, I'll enforce it. That our laws aren't procedurally fair to alleged fugitive slaves. We have to fix the laws, but I'll enforce even provisions of the Constitution that I hate. He says explicitly, this is a quote, that I hate slavery. He says, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. That's a direct quote. I cannot remember a time I did not so think and feel. It's his heart as well as his head. And yet he'll enforce stuff that he thinks is wrong if it's the law. He's a legalist. Frederick Douglass is a little different. Frederick Douglass says, well, it doesn't say slave in the Fugitive Slave Clause. And Lincoln is inaugural just says, yeah, it doesn't say slave, but we all know that's what they meant. And the intent of the law is, the law. Lincoln's more of a legalist. Douglass is more of a utopian, willing to actually, if a critic would say, stretch the law, he would say, try to read it in its best moral light. So there's a debate between Lincoln and Douglass. Douglass is the far left of the coalition. Lincoln is the center left of the coalition. Lincoln is never in his life the most radical, the most forward-looking, leaning politician. Never. But he's always the most forward-leaning who has a chance of getting elected. And as conditions evolve and opportunities arise, he always moves toward the light. He knows what North Star is. He knows actually slavery is wrong and we have to put it on a path of long-term extinction, but we might need to actually backtrack here and adjust there. But he knows where North Star is, and as events make possible, he always moves in one direction. He never backslides. But Douglass early on is not content with that at all. Douglass is born, Lincoln is low born. Oh my God, Douglass is even lower born. He's born a slave. He doesn't even know his birthday ever. You know the birthdays of your dogs and cats. He doesn't. He doesn't know who his father is ever. Okay? He teaches himself to read just as Lincoln does, and he manages to escape, and he's an astonishing orator and thinker, and they both basically they grow up basically with newspapers. Newspapers teach them basically how to be a human, because Douglass has no father, and Lincoln has a father who's not at all interested in developing Lincoln's capacities. They meet only 3 times in life. Douglass begins as a harsh critic of Abe Lincoln because he thinks Lincoln's just a sellout. He even criticizes Lincoln. He says, and the guy can't even write. Like, really? He actually says that. And he's very harshly critical of Lincoln. Now, in the middle of the Civil War, he just shows up they only meet 3 times, shows up at the White House unannounced. And this is a harsh critic of Lincoln. You think the current occupant of the White House would actually treat with courtesy some guy's been trashing him, up and down and sideways, has no appointment, no money or anything? And Lincoln says, I know who you are, Mr. Douglass. I've heard of you. Welcome. And they have a wonderful conversation. Douglass doesn't completely trust all of Lincoln's promises, but Lincoln says, I'll try to do this and that and the other thing. And Lincoln has an agenda. Lincoln needs Douglass because he wants blacks to sign up for the Union cause. They will help him win the war. Douglass wants blacks to sign up because if blacks sign up, they can win their freedom and citizenship and voting rights. So the 2 men begin to understand that they could work together on stuff. There's also, though, above and beyond, Lincoln is an amazing Paul. He's the best Paul of the century. And there's nothing wrong with being a politician if, you do it in the right way and you have the right values. But he also has a flash of actual recognition. This guy is like me. He's a black version of me. We were both born in the dirt, and we actually climbed up because of, our brains and a love of reading. And then the second time, Lincoln thinks he's about to lose re-election. But if he's going to lose re-election, at least he's going to try to free as many slaves as possible in the South. And he wants Douglas to get the word out in the South. Leave the plantation, join the Union Army, free yourself, because after Lincoln loses the election, he will hand over power peacefully to Douglas. To McClellan. And McClellan is probably going to repudiate all sorts of things, but he is going to be president until Inauguration Day. Even after he loses in the lame duck, he's still president. He wants to free as many slaves as possible. And Frederick Douglass is going to help him with that by getting the word out in the South. That's the second meeting. And Douglas really senses Lincoln's anti-slavery passion. He's a lawyer. He's a legalist. He'll enforce the Fugitive Slave Clause because it's the law. And Douglas wouldn't do that. They have different views on that. Then the third meeting is Inauguration Day, because Lincoln actually wins. Because actually blacks and blue do make a difference. 200,000 blacks are the margin of victory in the Civil War, and Atlanta falls, and the Union wins. Now it's Inauguration Day. The White House is open. Thousands of people flood the White House. Douglas, again, doesn't have any invitation, but he just kind of tries to crash the party. The guards, because he looks different than everyone else, he's a black guy, basically don't want to let him in. He kind of yells out, "Tell Lincoln I'm here, tell Lincoln I'm here." Something kind of like that. I'm maybe embroidering just a bit. And Lincoln sends word, let him in, makes a special effort to find Frederick Douglass, shakes his hand, and says, I'd like to know, what you think of the speech. And Douglas says, "You have lots of other people to send to." He says, "No, I care. There's no one whose views I care more about at this moment than yours." It's a guy's slave, a former slave. And Douglas says to him, "I think it was a sacred effort." And Lincoln says, "I'm glad you liked it." Those are the last words that that America's greatest white man and greatest black man exchange. You don't know that story. Perhaps every American should. And not very many weeks later, Lincoln is dead for having championed black voting rights, in fact. Okay. And in a poignant, because I am novelistic, and some of this, but I'm not making up any of these details. They're true. When she leaves the White House, Mary finds Abe's favorite walking stick, and gives it to Douglas because she thinks that he would have wanted that.
The detail that Abe was assassinated because of his pledge to support black voting rights. I had not known that. Do you want to tell that story?
So, and Douglas basically, since we're talking about Judaism in part, I never understood why Lincoln originally would believe in colonization. These are slaves. They're American-born. Their parents are American-born. Their grandparents were American-born. Why would he say, okay, let's free the slaves and not force them to go to Africa or South America, but incentivize them, give them vouchers or something like that? It's just like, when you go to the airport and they've oversold the ticket, they try to, bribe you into taking another flight or something. Why would you do that? And I figured out why. Because what does he know? He's self-taught. He has less than a year's classroom education his whole life. But he knows, actually, Aesop's fables and Shakespeare and Euclid and the Bible. So I figured this out because he gives a eulogy for Henry Clay. He's for colonization because he knows his Old Testament. He knows the story of Exodus. And when the Jews under Moses are freeing themselves from bondage in Pharaoh's Egypt, maybe it's not going to work very well for them to stay cheek by jowl with their former enslavers. Maybe that's just not going to work so well. So maybe actually it makes sense for them to go and find their own promised land. That's why Lincoln thinks this, because he's read Exodus, okay? And in the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, he says, you're going to be free. He issues this on September 22nd, 1862, after the Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Sharpsburg. As of January 1st, you're going to be free. And we're going to give you vouchers if you want. You're not forced to go elsewhere. But in the final Emancipation Proclamation, he doesn't do that. There's no talk of colonization. And instead, he says, this is a new thing, I want you to join the Union Army. I want you to leave your plantations, so you're no longer supporting that economy. The soldiers, the white Confederates, are going to have to go back to their farms, because you're not helping to plant and reap. Okay, but also to join our cause. And Frederick couldn't be happier with that. Okay, so now Lincoln is saying, okay, you're no longer aliens, strangers in a strange land. You are American-born people fighting for your own country. And if that's so, I have to move from not only you're born equal, but you're born a citizen and you're born, a voter. In the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Lincoln says, quote, I do not favor Negro citizenship. He thought everyone should be equally free, but he wasn't championing equal citizenship or equal voting. He evolves along this dimension, in part because if he had said Negro citizenship, he's DOA politically in Illinois, which is very, very racist. So some of it is, political calculation, but also he matures. And if blacks are fighting for their freedom, they get to vote. And at the end of the book, women are seen as part of the war effort in World War I, and they get to vote. And Nadine, in our lifetimes, if you're 19 years old and you're old enough to be drafted and sent off to Vietnam and maybe die there, you're old enough to vote on whether we should be in that war in the first place. And the slogan is, old enough to vote, old enough to fight, old enough to vote. And Lincoln, you're seeing that, 100 years earlier.
Mhm. Akhil, I must admit that until I read your book, I knew that the abolitionists, who I think most of us, or speaking for myself, certainly see as unquestionable heroes. I knew they were very controversial. I had not realized, however, that they were controversial even among the anti-slavery folks. Quite frankly, I had not parsed that difference. And you make this really, to me, astounding revelatory point that the whole concept of abolition was an American invention. I think most people don't know that.
Two things. One, you mentioned earlier, I didn't pick up on it. This is a book that talks about activists.
Yeah.
And you're an activist. It's talking about the leaders, but the leaders have followers. I don't think I'm just telling a story about famous people. I'm telling a story about low-born people who get other people to support their cause. So these are democratic stories, even though I'm telling you about the famous people. I'm not just telling you about Prince Andrew, who just popped out of some, rich woman's womb at the right time or something. I hate all of that. They don't believe in birth equality. When you're born a king or a prince or a baron or a lord, I hate all of that. We're born equal, but these are low-born people who are activists and who get other people to buy their books, Harriet Beecher Stowe, buy their newspapers, vote for them for president. So I'm picking up on this activist point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, among the activists, there's a debate between the center left and the hard left. That's true today. That's Spanberger versus Mondami or something like that. In the ACLU, there are a kind of the poster children activists, Rosa Parks, and they're the people who actually are not in maybe the clients you would have picked, the Gregory Johnsons or something, America, the red, white, and blue, we spit on you. There are folks, you even defend like Nazis. You do, because you believe in free speech and you don't love, but even on the left, okay, maybe, but they're ornery. They actually, sometimes they repel more people than they attract. This is your life, okay? That was true way back when. The anti-slavery mainstream versus the abolitionist extremists who say the Constitution sucks. They burn the Constitution. It's an agreement with hell. It's a covenant with death. this is not going to get you votes, okay? Because what's going to get you votes is waving the flag and not spitting on it. So the anti-slavery folks actually have a deep tension with the hardcore abolitionist extremists. And Douglas, moves from anti-constitution abolitionism, constitution sucks, to utopian constitution. Let's just kind of airbrush out the fugitive slave clause and the other things. So he decides it's better politics in the end to embrace the Constitution than to spit on it. But his constitutionalism is a little bit more fanciful. Lincoln says, actually, it has some bad things in it. We'll enforce the bad things. Here's what they both say, though. They both say they didn't use the word slave, and there's a reason why. Because they were ashamed of it. And if we really want to redeem them at their best, we've got to eventually put it on a path of ultimate extinction. In my chapter on Lincoln-Douglas debates, I have 10 different readings of 5 words that are maybe the most contested words in all of American history. All men are created equal. 10 different ways you could construe that, at least. And if I played a game with the audience right now, I say, who do you associate the Declaration of Independence with and what state? They would say Thomas Jefferson, Virginia. And in the introduction, I say it's not just Jefferson. It's not just Virginia. Right next to Jefferson is Ben Franklin from Pennsylvania. And next to him is John Adams from Massachusetts. Why is this important? Because Virginia doesn't end slavery before the Civil War. Pennsylvania does under Franklin. Massachusetts does. Immediately after the Declaration of Independence, there is an abolitionist project that begins in the world with the Pennsylvania State Constitution in 1776, crafted in what we call Independence Hall, only weeks after the Declaration of Independence. At a convention presided over by Ben Franklin, here's how that state constitution begins. All men are born equally free and independent. Massachusetts is going to adopt a state constitution in 1780 under John Adams. There's a convention. It begins, all men are born free and equal. In Pennsylvania, those words are going to lead to the abolition of slavery, and in Massachusetts as well. And in our lifetime, those very same words, all men are born free and equal, are going to be used by our friend Margaret Marshall to affirm gay rights and same-sex marriage in the Goodrich case, 2003, 2000.
About that,
I think,
yeah.
and just today, that was basically the Obergefell case, was in effect reaffirmed by the Supreme Court by not wanting to relitigate same-sex. The same words, all men are born free and equal. That's the birth equality. You can read it narrowly. You can read it broadly. You can say, oh, it's all men and women are created equal. Elizabeth Cady Stanton will say that at Seneca Falls. 5 words, deeply contested. But what Nadine told you, and this is the introduction to the book, abolition is an American idea. Okay, 1619 is very misleading. It's when slave ships arrive in America, well, big deal. Slavery is everywhere in the world. It's in Asia, among Asians. In Africa, they're enslaving fellow Africans. It's in South America. The Aztecs have slavery. There's New World slavery. 1619, in my view, is not news. It's old. It's no big deal. I'll tell you what is a big deal. Okay, because the ancient world has slavery and has the idea of freeing individual slaves. And individual slaves are freed in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Charlton Heston is freed in Ben-Hur. Zero Mostel is freed in A Funny Thing Happened in the Way of the Form. There's slavery. There's individual emancipation, manumission. Now, New World slavery is sometimes much worse. It's more racialized. It's more hereditary. It's more hard-edged. It's more cruel. It's commercialized. You're buying and selling people. So other forms of unfreedom didn't always have all those other features of race and buying and selling. You don't buy and sell serfs quite. They're not transferable. So American slavery is, especially, down in the Deep South, really nasty stuff. Okay. But for tens of thousands of years in most societies, there's slavery and the idea of freeing slaves. Where does the idea, though, come of ending slavery, of abolishing slavery, not freeing individual slaves? Jesus doesn't say that in the New Testament. He doesn't. okay? I'm a Christian. He doesn't say that. The idea of ending slavery, of abolition, is an American project. The world's first abolition society is formed in Philadelphia in 1775, and its presidents, its presiding officers, very quickly are going to be Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration of Independence. And immediately after the Declaration of Independence, Pennsylvania starts to abolish slavery. Massachusetts abolishes slavery. So does New Hampshire. Very soon after, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. There is an abolition project in the North that Howard Zinn didn't tell you about, that Charles Beard didn't tell you about, that the 1619 folks don't tell you about. But Lincoln understands all that, and he's standing on the shoulders of these abolitionists. And he's saying he's an originalist. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty, not slavery, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He's going to take this founding inheritance, claim it as MLK will, not spit on it and say we must redeem it. He's got an interpretation. There are other interpretations. He's got a northern interpretation, and it travels through Ben Franklin and John Adams, and John Adams' son, John Quincy Adams, who looms large in this book as a kind of missing link between the generations. John Quincy's son, Charles Francis Adams, who's going to be the vice presidential nominee of the Free Soil Party in 1848, going to be Lincoln's ambassador to Britain. So from John to John Quincy to Charles Francis to Abraham Lincoln, there is an abolitionist project, and you didn't quite know about it because you didn't have a narrative of the American story that actually tells the story chronologically, like the different generations in Alex Haley's Roots or something, the different generations of that family.
Well, that's a wonderful segue to, I want to hear the audience questions. We'd love to hear your questions and comments. And please don't be shy.
And whilst waiting,
Sir,
I do just want to give a shout out. I have at least one student in the audience, and it is very meaningful that my student Alex is here. She was my head TA, and it's great to see you, Alex.
Welcome, Alex. Hi there.
Good evening. You brought out those 5 words: all men are created equal, and then there are 10 different interpretations that you talk about. But the root of that goes way back to the 10 Commandments. All the commandments are appropriate to the men. No women are ever acknowledged in that. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. The women do not have that commandment. They can do whatever they want to do.
So Elizabeth Cady Stanton at Seneca Falls generates a document. Frederick Douglass is there with her. It's based on the Declaration of Independence, but it reworks it. And she has a very famous sentence: we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men and women are created equal. And by the end of this book, women are going to be voting equally with men. And the 14th Amendment makes citizens of all persons, whether male or female, if you're born on American soil under the American flag. So one of the big themes of the book is not just racial equality, but sex equality. Now, where does all men are created equal come from? If you read the notes to the introduction, you'll see it comes from Locke, perhaps most of all. It is a theological notion. The thought is that in the eyes of God, we're all in the same species, and therefore no person is born a slave, and no person is born a master. Here's the thought, since we were talking about animals before, and how Lincoln was very nice to animals, and he didn't drink and smoke and chase women, and he was really admirable. So if I run across in the wilderness an elephant or a horse or a dog that's wild, I can make that creature my own. I can possess it and tame it and sell it. If I were a certain kind of person, I'm not, I could kill it for food, for fur, for fun even. Now, again, I'm not that kind of person, but you're allowed to do that. You can't do that when you run across a fellow human. That's the Lockean idea. Your fellow human is not a tameable beast of the field. You weren't born a slave, a master, and that person wasn't born a slave. So it goes all the way back to Locke. In what way are people equal? They're equal. They're not equally tall. They're not equally intelligent, perhaps, but they're equal in their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're equal in that none is a slave and none by birth is a slave master. And that is the idea, and it goes, and it's theological, you're right, and it's based on Locke and a theologian named Judicious Hooker. This is all in the end notes of the first chapter. Now, if you experience the book in audio version, you won't have the notes, but you will have the delight, perhaps in the introduction at least. It's read by my friend John Mulaney, who is amazing. He doesn't read the whole book, but he does read actually the intro. And I wanted him to do it. He's a dear friend because he kind of reminds me a little bit of Lincoln. He's tall, he's lanky, he's got dark hair, he's from Illinois, and I want him to be the next Lincoln impersonator. Sam Waterston is amazing. He's from Connecticut, but Sam Waterston and Daniel Day-Lewis are kind of passing from the scene. We need a new generation of people. And so within the first 10 seconds, you will hear John Mulaney's voice say, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicates the proposition that all men are created equal. So that first chapter is all about what Lincoln is actually saying at Gettysburg. He's going back to the founding documents. He's an originalist. He's claiming them. He's saying the Constitution is actually pro-liberty and anti-slavery and pro-equality. He's rooting his claims not just in the Constitution, but in an even earlier document, the Declaration of Independence. They're saying the Constitution has to be faithful to all that. He's making very elaborate arguments, and I walk you through them. And all men are created equal does build on Locke, who actually has a religious idea that we're all equal in God's eyes. And Frederick Douglass is very good on feminism. He says truth is of no color and right is of no sex or something like that. He's a great crusader for women's equality as well as Black equality.
Thank you so much. I think we have more questions, including from the online audience, that Amy will share with us.
I have a couple from Anita, so let me do one of those and then we'll go to the audience here. How does the thread from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitutional Convention and Reconstruction Amendments lead us to birthright citizenship?
The first sentence of the 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. I think that's like word for word. I'm going to shorten it. All persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. Now, I skipped over a little bit subject to the jurisdiction. We could talk about that maybe offline, but the basic idea is if you are born, and it's a narrower idea and a deeper idea than that first one. I told you everyone is born equal. That's in the world. No one is born a slave. No one is born a master. That's universal. It's Euclidean. It's mathematical. That's Lincoln's initial view. But now Elizabeth Cady Stanton comes along, and she has a different idea. It's narrower, but it's deeper. It's about American citizenship. See, because not everyone is born an American citizen. If you're, born in India or Canada or Kenya to non-American parents, ordinarily you wouldn't be born an American citizen. So it's no longer universal and mathematical. Everyone is born equally free across the world. It's a different idea. You are born, if you're born in America, and an equal citizen, whether you're born Black or white or male or female. So it's not universal, and it's not just that you're free, it's you're a citizen with rights as a citizen, rights of speech, press, petition, religious exercise or non-exercise, rights of to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, rights to fair judicial procedures. Okay, it's a narrower and deeper idea than just not being a slave. How did we get from born equally free to born equally American citizen? Because remember, Lincoln in 1858 in Lincoln-Douglas debate says, I do not favor Negro citizenship. How does that happen? The war. If blacks are going to be fighting for America, they deserve to be treated as citizens, and Lincoln is eventually going to say voters. That's one stream or tributary that leads to the 14th Amendment. Another one is Elizabeth, because she thinks that women are entitled to equal rights. And indeed, some of that language of the 14th Amendment, some of it actually is very similar to things that Elizabeth says first at Seneca Falls with Frederick Douglass right there supporting her, and later in pamphlets and other publications in early 1865. The women's rights movement and a black rights movement are going to converge, and the war is going to create all sorts of opportunities and create this idea of equal citizenship. And then Abe will eventually say, because a 2-year-old's a citizen, but they don't vote. Women are citizens, but they don't yet vote. Abe is going to say at the end of his life, since black men fought for the Union Army, they deserve voting rights. And women not initially, because they didn't fight on the battlefield of glory alongside Denzel Washington. That's the movie. But they're eventually going to get it, in part because in World War I, they're perceived as important contributors to the war effort. And Woodrow Wilson, in fact, will support women's suffrage as a war measure. Wars, sometimes, generate strong, they threaten liberty, but sometimes they expand equality. Because if you're loyal to the war effort, we're going to bring you in.
I'm just going to add something, because I think you didn't say orally, Akhil, something that I read for the first time in your book, that when John Wilkes Booth was in the audience, who went and heard Lincoln make the pledge to fight for voting rights for African American men, that's what resolved.
Then and there, at that very instant, he tells his partner in crime, David Harold, we're going to kill him. Yes, then and there. Americans didn't know that in 1865, but we now know that.
Hi. But a quick answer, please, so that we can get to the next question.
A follow on to that, though, is I've heard some say you're talking about people who have fought or are willing to fight and therefore birthright citizenship. How does that extend to people who were born to undocumented people in the United States?
The words don't specify. I'm a citizen whether I'm born black or white, male or female, Jew or Gentile, in wedlock or out of wedlock, whether my parents are citizens or not, whether they're here legally or not. The text is the text. Now, did they mean it that way? Yes, they did. Children of gypsies, wandering gypsies, that's their language today. Today we would say, back then, today we'd say Roma, are citizens. Children of Chinese immigrants, they're not, the Chinese immigrants might not be eligible for citizenship, but the children born in America are citizens. It's not about who your daddy was. It's about who you are. You are born an equal citizen. Oh, and it was clearly about citizenizing the children of slaves. But I promise you, some of those slaves were technically illegal aliens. They were born in Africa, okay? They were smuggled into America illegally, which had prohibited the slave trade. And their children, though, are clearly citizens. And everyone knew that there were illegal aliens in America because Abe Lincoln hanged a slave trader because the slave trade was so odious. Everyone knew that people were being smuggled in, again, free Africans illegally, and they were slaves. And the 14th Amendment was about making their children citizens. It's not about who your parents are. It's about who you are. You, to repeat, are equal, black or white, Jew or Gentile, male or female, in wedlock or out of wedlock, to citizen parents or not, whether you're firstborn in the family or fifthborn. I would say gay or straight as well. And that's actually Obergefell.
And to bring it up to date, every single judge who has ruled on this issue, currently appointed by many different presidents, has agreed that even if your parents are not legally present, that's irrelevant. You're entitled to birthright
They can be
citizenship.
punished in all sorts of ways and fined, but we don't visit that upon you. Oh, and there's a congressional statute that says this in 1950. Oh, and there are 4 Supreme Court cases, beginning with a case called Wong Kim arc. Oh, and there's a lot of history behind this. Oh, and there's an important pronouncement from Abraham Lincoln's Attorney General. There's so much support for this thought.
Hi. Your shout out to your student reminded me that in addition to this wonderful book, you teach students today in universities. So I'm curious, how are they responding to the idea that some of our forefathers were actually heroic and interesting people and thoughtful people and concerned people? Because I think there's been a slightly different attitude on campus of late. So I'm curious how they're taking that.
So I used to think I teach law. I realized at a certain point that I teach students. Okay. And I agree with you, my friend, that a narrative has arisen that basically America did nothing good or right. I am not a fan of Howard Zinn's book, which is the probably a dominant book that this generation may have read. In fairness to Zinn, here's what happened. History was taught for decades in a way that airbrushed out all the problems. Zinn wrote a book that was a counter history, and as a counter history, it was okay because people were getting the standard propaganda, if you will, and then they read this book and it kind of evens things up. And if you're 17 years old, that's very liberating to hear the other side of it. But now schools aren't teaching the standard textbooks very much, and so they either know nothing at all or only Zinn. Enter my book that tries to tell you the good and the bad. Oh, I'm going to tell you tons about John C. Calhoun and the 3/5 Clause and the Fugitive Slave Clause and slavery in America. I'm going to tell you a lot of stuff, but I'm going to try to give you one-stop shopping if you're willing to read 3 books, But if you're willing to read Lord of the Rings, which is 3 books, or Harry Potter, which is 7 books. But yes, look, I'm a parent. My wife and I have 3 kids, pretty much they're in their 20s. That generation doesn't read books nearly as much as my generation did. And the narrative that it's getting in high school, I think, is spotty. And that's why I'm trying to offer a national narrative that liberals and conservatives can agree on, because there's some basic facts of the matter. And I won't hide the bad stuff, but I'll also tell you, America in the world is the nation that begins abolition, not Britain in 1833, Pennsylvania and Massachusetts and New England starting in 1776. We put the Constitution to a vote up and down a continent, and no other country in the history of the world had ever done that. More people were allowed to vote on the Constitution than had ever been allowed to vote on anything before in human history. And South Carolina slavery was distinctively cruel. All of those things are true. And we got rid of slavery. And we produced an Abe Lincoln. I'm not inventing him. And we produced a Frederick Douglass and an Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was racist at her worst moments. Oh, I cringe sometimes, but I show you the things and I try to explain why she's saying what she's saying. Because she's frustrated. She's educated, and other people who aren't as educated, who happen to be men, are getting the vote, and she's not. But this country produced the Big Six: Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, Hamilton. They all had flaws, but wow, what a crew. And it produced Abe and Harriet and Frederick and Elizabeth. I'm not making any of those things up. I'm not plucking them from obscurity, some, person you never heard of before. Other historians do that. They find someone kind of interesting you're going to feel good about. I'm saying these are the dominant people of the century.
Thank you.
Gary Rose, political science professor here. You were our guest speaker a few years ago.
Yes.
When your first volume came out. I didn't hear you mention anything about Mr. Sumner yet. And I believe a former student of yours wrote a fantastic book on him.
Yes,
and you endorsed the book as well.
very
And-
enthusiastically.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could at least mention something
Thank
about
you.
Charles Sumner.
Sumner appears very prominent in this book. I'm very interested in how people die as well as they live. I wrote about dramatic deaths long before the Charlie Kirk episode. And in volume 3, I'm going to tell you about MLK's death and JFK's death and RFK's death. So deaths are really significant in America. The last chapter of The Words That Made Us, I kill off all my main characters. God kills them off, but and I narrate their death scenes and tell you why they're important. I can't don't have the time to go into that now. I tell you how John Quincy Adams wants to die in a dramatic way, and he does manage to die in a dramatic way, and so does John Adams, and so does Thomas Jefferson. And this is not coincidental. Okay. Abe Lincoln dies as well as it's possible to die. He's martyred on Good Friday in a Christian nation. Okay. Deaths are important. I narrate Charles Sumner's death scene. He's a very great man. And I talk about how he's, bludgeoned into unconsciousness for giving heroic anti-slavery speeches, talking about how white men are raping Black slave women, including a senator from South Carolina, Andrew Butler. And I narrate his death scene. I show you his death image of him on his deathbed saying, "Don't let my civil rights bill die." So he is heroic. There's a great biography of him by one of my favorite students, Zakir Tamiz is his name. He's maybe 26 years old. He's written this epic book. He happens to be Muslim American, and I mention that just only because of the diversity, the religious diversity of America. Now, my blurbs are sometimes a little bit edgy, and this one has an edginess to him because I actually, in the course of saying how good Zakir's book is, and it's blurbed by many people, maybe even Skip Gates, but the blurbers for this book include a who's who of great academics. But mine says something like the following: we have many great biographies of Lincoln, and now at long last we have one of his partner and prod, Sumner. So what I'm actually saying there is the other biographies of Sumner suck. Okay. And I don't like them. And I don't like David Herbert Donald's, which is not fair to Sumner. I don't like David Herbert Donald on Abe Lincoln. I don't think he captures the greatness of Lincoln or Sumner, in part because he was too much of a Southern sympathizer in some ways, a student of J.G. Randall. This is inside baseball. But then I say, this is better than the others. Then I say what Chernow did for Hamilton, Tamiz now does for Sumner, period. Musical, anyone? Question mark. So I love the book. You should read it. He's a sweetie. I have him on my podcast, and the whole episode when he talks about the book. I've had Nadine on the podcast at least twice. It's a free weekly podcast. We have interesting people on the right and left, academics like Gordon Wood, journalists like Linda Greenhouse, politicians of all stripes. We had Jamie Raskin on recently. We've had a lot of conservative politicians. The founder of the Federalist Society and national co-chair has been on the podcast probably at least 7 or 8 times. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Zakir's book, the podcast is free. And if you're a lawyer, you can get CLE credit for it. We have 250 past episodes. Just hop on and listen to a conversation with Zakir about his book. Oh, it's wonderful. I think that was a live podcast that we did at Yale Law School.
We have time for one more question. So, Amy?
I think this is an interesting wrap-up question from Thomas T. He said, if it is obvious the rights of all people born under the flag and even the rights of all people in the world inherently are inalienable, why are so many fighting against acting in accordance with this or scared of the idea? It seems antithetical to the Great American Project.
So many people don't know what the Great American Project is, and they don't know why, even if we have these rules, why we have them. And they amended the Constitution, and we could too. You could say They didn't face an onslaught at the border. There were, a few technical illegal aliens. We could change that. That's up to you, my fellow Americans. But I'd want you to know why they put things in before we take things out. Okay? Oh, we could make flag burning a crime if we amended the Constitution. A constitutional amendment was proposed in my lifetime. It came pretty close to passing.
Within a hair's breadth.
I testified against it, okay? Because I actually know why we have some of these rules. And if you don't, you should read Nadine's books because she will explain to you why we have these things. She's written at least 2 books just on that topic, at least 2. And, you could read her briefs and other things. So the question is, why do so many Americans, have the views they do? And I think it's partly because on the left and on the right, we don't have a national narrative telling us, here's what we the people did. Here were our lapses. Here are the amendments, some of which involve making amends for some of the sins and the flaws of earlier generations. It would be astonishing if it's perfect today. But if you know the story of previous generations, you can think more intelligently about what would make it more perfect tomorrow. You know the stories of the activists, who crusaded, of the people on the other side who pushed against them and what their arguments were. Their arguments were not always horrible ones. I'll tell you in the first volume about the people who stayed loyal to the king. Some of them were very decent people with reasons. Okay, I want you, the reader, to know not what my politics are. I'm hoping when you read these books, you won't know. Just cards on the table. I'm pro-choice, but I'm very skeptical of Roe versus Wade. I don't own a gun, never have, but I make the case for gun rights in these books because I think actually there's a constitutional case to be made for them. So these books are not about me. They're not about my ethnicity, my clan, my tribe, my religion. They're about us. And I think we need these books precisely so that Americans can know the story of us and then can decide how we should write the next chapter.
I think that is such a perfect last question and last answer, and it brings us back to the theme of this whole series, join the conversation. And you have given us a brilliant scholarly analysis, but it is also a call to action, information, informing yourself, knowing about the founding principles and how they apply today is actually a tool for making them a reality, either as they were originally drafted, or perhaps we can perfect them as happened in earlier generations. So I want to thank everybody for joining the conversation, for exercising your precious freedom to listen, as well as your freedom to read. I hope that you will read the book. I will also say, in addition to the book, for those who have younger generations in your family who might have a shorter attention span, Akhil wrote a fabulous op-ed essay in the Wall Street Journal very recently, which answered that excellent question about birthright citizenship. It's very entertaining. It's personal, which is unusual for him. You'll see a picture of the infant Akhil with his parents. Very charming. Thank you all so much for your interest in our Constitution. Thank you.